Hello, welcome to Book Circle. I'm Earl Weinberg, and this is Ellen Reed, our author for tonight. Ellen, without giving anything away, what can you tell us about Consuming the Soul?
Well, it is based on actually a New England legend of the Yankee vampire.
Oh.
And I don't know if you're familiar with the Yankee vampire.
I know of one family that was accused of it.
Okay. Back in the 1800s, tuberculosis was rampant. It was one of the biggest causes of mortality in New England.
Mm-hmm.
So, and because it's contagious, you had whole families where they might lose the entire family, they might lose half the family. And so there was a lot of fear associated with tuberculosis, or consumption, as they called it back then.
Oh, as in consuming the soul.
Exactly. So back in the 1800s, there was a doctor who came over from Eastern Europe, and in Rhode Island, where this legend seemed to be particularly prevalent, had convinced some of the people that the first person who died from tuberculosis was actually being inhabited by an evil entity.
Oh.
And when they died and were buried, that evil entity then fed off the next person in the family. So that person would die, and and this would work its way through the family. And the only way you could save this person was to dig up the initial victim, and if there was fresh blood in the heart or the liver, then you had to burn it and feed those ashes to the second victim.
Okay.
And needless to say, it was not a very effective method of treatment. There was a pretty well-known case in Rhode Island by a girl named Mercy Brown, who had been accused of this. Her mother had died of tuberculosis. She got tuberculosis. Her brother got tuberculosis. They sent the brother off to the West, Colorado or someplace. She dies of tuberculosis shortly after he comes back, and then he promptly starts getting worse.
Yeah.
Now, she died in January, so they had put her basically in a crypt till they could bury her, because the ground's frozen. So somebody convinced them, you need to go dig this guy up, go dig her up, because if there's fresh blood in there, it's the only way we're going to save her brother.
Of course, if it's cold January weather, that'll preserve the blood nicely, won't it?
Exactly, and that's exactly what happened. She was not decaying, she was pretty well preserved, so they went, vampire. So they took out her heart, and they burned it, and they fed the ashes to her brother, who promptly died. Anyway, this story was inspired by that legend.
Okay. So
it's basically this girl and her family, they come to northern New Hampshire to spend the summer, and they're in this house, and this girl finds a hope chest with a bunch of things belonging to a girl who died at 17.
Well, of tuberculosis or under suitably mysterious circumstances?
Right. Well, the odd thing is, several of her siblings also died at 17.
Oh.
And so, the more research this girl does, she suddenly realized there's a whole slew of these family members that died when they reached 17.
Let me guess how old she is.
Well, she's 14, but her sister is about to turn 17. So now she's got to try and figure out exactly what's happening and how to stop it.
Right, I see, okay. So there we go.
Kind of a Gothic horror, if you will.
Right, now Gothic to me suggests early 1800s. Is it set in the early 1800s?
Part of it is. There are flashbacks.
Oh,
the diary is all set back in the 1800s.
But our heroine, who's 14, she is a contemporary
Yes, she is in modern day, but it's kind of that same sort of story, though. It's dark. It's there's storms.
Well, I didn't see a lot of pastels on the book cover. No.
No, not many.
Okay. Have you? Well, let's see. I would assume that you generally like horror and Gothic yourself. Is that true?
Yeah, I've read my share of horror stories. course, Stephen King, The Shining, all of those. I've read Bram Stoker.
I was going to ask. I mean, we're talking vampires, got to bring up Dracula.
I'm not so much into the modern day vampire stories, such as they are, because they tend to be more romance a lot.
You noticed, yeah.
Yeah, than,
sparkly
horror.
vampires?
Yeah, sparkly vampires. No, I'm really more into the darker type of story.
Okay. So I was about to ask if you'd read Dracula, but you already told me you had. When you came to do the actual writing, do you have did you deliberately design a system? Did you fall into a system? Did you do it on the backs of envelopes in odd moments? How did it work?
I actually started writing I have like 10 different books in various stages, 3 of which have been published. This was, I think, the second or third I actually wrote. But I started writing these because I got involved with National Novel Writing Month.
Oh, okay.
NaNoWriMo, where in 30 days in November, you're supposed to write a 50,000-word novel.
Yes.
That's the goal.
I see. That
this
sounds
is
pretty...
slightly over 50,000 words.
I'm sure you didn't lose points.
No, I got them all. But I started writing one, then each year I write another one, and so my goal is to write those 50,000 words. So before the month starts, I kind of come up with a loose outline. The book I wrote this last November had a very rigid outline because it was based on an actual murder in Henniker. But this one, it was, okay, I'm going to write about this vampire because I just read about it, this legend, and kind of just came up with a vague idea of where I wanted it to go.
Okay.
So.
You do not have to answer if this would be a spoiler, but you're talking about how tuberculosis played into the legend of vampires. In the story, in your book, is there actual supernatural vampirism going on, or is it...
There is supernatural stuff that goes on.
I didn't want to force it out of you if you didn't want to tell. Because
no, that's a whole part of this.
Okay.
It's a supernatural kind of story.
And it took you about a year to write the book?
No, it took me 30 days to write the book. And then... But it took me longer than that, than to do the editing. I mean, I wrote it and then put it away, and then... wasn't until I really started publishing books that I started looking back going, what other books did I write that I could now do something else with?
I see, okay.
So, but to write the actual first rough draft was 30 days.
Okay, I find that extremely impressive.
All my books are written in 30 days.
Okay.
At least the first draft.
Okay, and then you edit the heck out of them.
Yes. Then I go back and I edit it. I have a bunch of people read it. I have hired professional editors to look through it. So, it gets a lot of reading before I finally say, okay, hopefully this is good enough. There it goes. Now,
about editing, I've heard a couple of things. One of them is the general advice, murder your darlings, which is, find some very self-indulgent passage and tear it out. The other thing I remember is that Rudyard Kipling edited himself by sitting down with his manuscript and a big bottle of ink. And he would blot out anything he didn't think he absolutely needed, which is why his writing is so tight, sometimes so tight that you can't quite figure out what's going on because he took out a little too much exposition. So do you find either of those things applying to you?
Somewhere in the middle.
Somewhere in the middle.
I mean, there are parts that people, I'll have the editor, they'll say, you need to take this out. And I'm like, but that's like my favorite part. And they'll go, yeah, but you don't need it. So there have been those times where there was a part I really liked, and they said, no, just take that out of there.
Okay. Do you do genres other than horror?
My other 2 books that I've published, one is, it's a kid's book, 10 and up, and it's more like a time travel mystery called The Gangster's Gold. The other one is the beginning of a series of a family that becomes ghost hunters. So again, that's like 10 and up.
Okay. Well, that might be horror depending on the kind of ghosts they wind up catching.
Right, it's a little different. It's more ghost story than horror.
Okay.
You know, I think those are kind of separate. You know, horror is a lot of psychological tension and so on.
Are you familiar, are you familiar with the Blossom Culp books by Richard Peck?
Blossom Culp.
One of them was made into a TV movie by Disney called The Ghost Belonged to Me.
No, it's not ringing a bell.
Okay, well, I offer it to you as inspirational reading.
I shall
look. And you might see me reading it on this show sometime. But anyway, so children's ghost hunting, okay. Okay, horror is a genre with a lot of baggage, so to speak. Are there cliches of horror that you make a deliberate effort to avoid or to, as they say, deconstruct, like run them backwards for the shock value or anything like that?
Well, I mean, even though this one technically has a vampire in it, I would avoid anything with your typical blood-sucking vampire.
Okay.
I mean, and the romance aspect. I mean, the whole supernatural romance has become quite a thing.
Oh yeah, you can find a whole shelf full that labeled that at the Barnes & Noble.
Everybody now has a werewolf boyfriend. You know, that to me has become quite a cliche, and I'm not interested in doing that.
Okay.
You know, I tried to look at it slightly from a different perspective. You know, okay, you have vampires, but then there's what's called a Yankee vampire, which is actually quite different. So I wanted to come at it from a different perspective.
Was the Yankee vampire legend invented in America, or was it brought over from England or from some other country?
It's primarily in America and in New England. Vermont actually kind of had it as well. For some reason, it sort of jumped over New Hampshire. New Hampshire didn't seem to be quite as susceptible
Something
to
about all that granite.
I guess so. But there have been instances, say, in Vermont where they will have dug up people and they will found that the corpse was decapitated or their bones were rearranged. And that was a sign that people had suspected that person of being a vampire.
Good grief.
So it's kind of a New England thing.
Okay. Is there anything that you feel that most people don't know about, either as readers or as writers, don't know about horror that you wish they did?
Avoid the cliches, I guess.
Other than avoid the cliches.
I don't typically write, this is probably the only real horror book I think I would say have written.
Okay.
So I'm more into sort of ghost stories type thing. This was kind of, I was looking for something different than ghost stories, which I've written several, but only published the one.
Okay.
You know.
Okay. Well, would you be willing to read us a passage from it?
Sure, I can do that.
Okay.
I'm the girl in the book, the main character, her name is Sophia. Her sister's name is Maya. Okay, just because those names get mentioned, so it might be helpful.
Yeah, we need a little context. Thank you.
All right, so hopefully I have picked a portion that doesn't need too much more than that. All right, and it's told from the perspective of Sophia. After lunch, I decided to return to the graveyard. I wanted to record the names and other information engraved on the Parson family headstones. It might help me unravel the mystery of all these dead teenagers. The afternoon was a lovely 70 degrees, and although a bit humid from the previous day's rain, my spirits were lifted. I shifted my backpack to a more comfortable position, and following the footprints still visible in the damp earth, made my way toward the graveyard in the woods. Cursing softly, I swatted at an annoying mosquito as I approached the desolate burial yard. One of the bad things about walking through the woods, I mused, were bugs. Nasty, biting, blood-sucking bugs. As I examined the latest bite, I was startled by a movement in the trees from where I stood. I went very still, scanning the cemetery and woods around me. Had I seen someone? Of course, it might have been a deer, but I had my doubts. I took another step forward. Hello? My voice quavered as I strained to hear any unusual sounds or detect further movement. Several long minutes passed, and all I heard was the chirp of insects and the occasional bird song. Slowly, I relaxed. Normally, I am not this nervous. In fact, I always considered myself a reasonably brave and level-headed person. I don't freak out at every little noise in the middle of the night or scream at bugs. However, since we arrived here, I have been a lot more high-strung. Maybe because of Mom's odd behavior or the mystery of the dead girl, but suddenly I was Miss Uber Antsy. Everything spooked me. I needed to get a grip. I took a deep breath. "Here I come," I called loudly, just in case anyone skulked in the bushes. Cautiously, I crept forward, stopping every few steps to look around, till I reached the dilapidated fence. I paused once more, gripping my notebook so tightly the metal spiral dug into my hand, leaving a painful indentation. When still nothing happened, I took another deep breath and released it. Paranoia did not suit me. Time to get to work. I dug a pen out of my backpack and entered the graveyard. I decided I would write down the names and any additional information engraved on each of the headstones. Many of the stones had fallen and were now carpeted in a thick layer of fuzzy moss. A few were broken, with shattered stones scattered across the ground. On others, the writing had eroded to the point where they were almost impossible to decipher. I would just do my best. It was an even more tedious job than I'd expected. The mosquitoes used me as their personal smorgasbord. I regretted not thinking to bring bug spray. I'd pay for that later. Mosquitoes love me. For every one bite Maya gets, I get 20. After I finished copying down the information for one Benjamin Thomas Parsons, 1800 to 1845, it was time for a break. I stood and stretched. I'd recorded about 10 gravestones so far. For some, it was necessary to clear away a ton of brush to read the inscriptions. That had taken more time than I'd liked. There were probably 20 more stones visible through the weeds, and who knew how many were still hidden. I sighed as I pulled a bottle of water out of my pack. Cursing, I smacked another mosquito. I considered heading home. Otherwise, I might not have the strength to leave after all these little evil bloodsuckers had drained me dry. A crack of a twig brought me to full alert, my heart in my throat. I leapt to my feet, and a shadowy figure materialized at the edge of the woods. I backed up, nearly tripping over one of the fallen headstones. I couldn't speak. The pounding in my ears drowned out all other sounds. The mysterious figure hovered in the shadows of the forest edge before stepping out of the sunlight and morphing into a man. I instantly recognized him as the mysterious guy from the lodge. He halted outside the fence and stared at me as if he had just noticed my presence. "Oh, hello there," he said in a deep, melodious voice. His smile was warm but hesitant, as if unsure of his welcome. "I apologize if I startled you. Rarely anyone frequents this cemetery." I swallowed, trying to will my heart to slow down. "I was just, I gestured helplessly at the notebook clutched in my sweaty hand. The man nodded as if he understood. "Recording headstones?" He took another step towards me. He was at least 6 feet tall, with that long, dark hair curling over the collar of his white shirt, again reminding me of that actor, Colin Firth, who played a wonderful Mr. Darcy in one of the film productions of Pride and Prejudice. This guy was remarkably handsome, yet something about his deep-set eyes made me nervous. His smile might be welcoming, but his eyes most definitely were not. They were flat and cold. I nodded and licked my lips. Yes, for a project. I'm homeschooled, and my dad wants me to do a project about the history of this area, and my friend showed me the graveyard yesterday, so I thought I'd come and write down the names and see if I could find out who they were. My mouth ran on fast forward. It took all my concentration to make myself shut up. The man's dark eyes continued to drill into me, never looking away. I clenched my notebook tighter in a vain attempt to keep my hands from shaking. "That's very interesting," he said, taking another step towards me. "There are many intriguing stories in old graveyards. I myself have been recording them for years." He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small notebook as if to prove his point. "I am a historian of sorts, amateur really, but I find old forgotten cemeteries fascinating, as I'm guessing you do as well." Well, I don't really spend much time in graveyards, I mumbled, scrambling to gather my stuff. In fact, I was about to head home. My mom is expecting me and I need to go. So, graveyards are kind of cool, but I don't really know much about them. Again, I was babbling. This definitely wasn't a trait I was happy to discover. I'd have to put some serious effort to stop that. The man glanced around the graveyard. So much history here. So much tragedy. He turned to me once more. You feel it too, don't you? He glanced toward the large oak where Mercy May's headstone stood. I shivered, clutching my backpack tightly to my chest. Yeah, I'm sure lots of sad things happened here. I edged toward the gate. I mean, when people die, it's always sad, right? And then lots of people died young back then. Ugh, why did I say that? I felt like I'd revealed a subject that shouldn't be discussed out loud. The man's eyes gleamed with interest. Yes, they did. Many died as mere children. Sometimes whole family died for no reason. Or so they thought. I slung my backpack over my shoulder, but froze at his words. Did he know something about the deaths of Mercy May and her siblings? I knew I should just get out of there, but I couldn't resist. Do you know what killed those people? The ones where whole families died, I mean. Suddenly, everything changed. It was as if the world had been dropped into a vacuum, creating a silence so intense my head wanted to explode. The breath was squeezed from my body, leaving me paralyzed. I had experienced nothing like it before, and I hope to God I never do again. And then it ended. Wide-eyed, I gaped at the man, but he seemed unaffected by the event. He stood as precisely as before, not a hair out of place, but he studied me with narrow eyes. Consumption. What? The word sounded alien to me. I shook my head to clear it. Didn't help. Consumption, repeated the man patiently, never taking his eyes from me. Today, they call it tuberculosis. Back in the 19th century, they called it consumption. People believed the disease consumed the body from within, wasting it away to nothing. Many people in these parts expired from that dread malady. Oh, I replied in a small voice. That was a start at any rate. I would look up tuberculosis when I got home, but right now it was time to get out of there. Well, thanks for the information. I've really got to go. I'll see you. I turned and all but ran down the trail leading back toward our house. As I hurried away, I heard the man call. By the way, my name is Hiram Parsons. I expect I'll be seeing you again soon.
Oh, good. And now I have the deepest suspicion of those mosquitoes. Well, thank you. Thank you very much. And do you have any other titles of yours you would like to mention?
Well, I have two other books. Oh, I actually have them, but they're over there. One is called The Gangster's Gold, which, like I said, is a time travel mystery. Girl is trying to figure out what happened to a young man that disappeared in the 1920s with a whole bunch of money belonging to a gangster, a rum runner. So she travels back in time, and there's much danger and excitement involved, treasure and so on. And then, as I said, the other one is called The Ghost of Barred Owl Farm, and it's about the family where the dad's watched like way too much TV and thinks because he's seen them do ghost hunting on TV that they could do ghost hunting. And then, of course, he knows nothing about it, but the son is happy because they get to buy all that fancy equipment, and the daughter, who wants no part of this, is just like, just shoot me now. What did I do to deserve this?
Clearly, he did not hear the injunction, don't try this at home.
Exactly. So then, chaos ensues when they run into real ghosts.
It would. Okay, well, thank you. And perhaps we'll have you over to do those books.
And then, like I said, I'm working on a book about the first murder in Henniker, New Hampshire.
That's historical.
Yes, it's a true story, and I kind of call it creative nonfiction only because I have to fill in a few of the blanks, but I know all the details, and so it's the untimely death of Nettie Bell Douglas. So.
That's a great name, and it's a real person.
Yes, a real person.
Cool. Okay, well, thank you very much.
Well, thank you.
Hope to have you back.
It's been fun. I'd be happy to come.